Midnight, the courtyard burns with torchlight, shadows flickering like restless spirits. A body sways from the gnarled branches of the tree of punishments, its roots darkened by fresh blood. Bare feet drip red onto the soil, drop by drop, feeding the earth that once groaned beneath chains. The air is thick with smoke and whispers, curses spat, prayers murmured, silence louder than drums. The clink of iron echoes steady as a heartbeat. September 14th, 1823, the voice cuts through the night. In the courtyard of Baron Caldus's estate, the master was no longer master. The moment freezes. Time begins to turn backward. The year is 1820, Pernambuco, Brazil. Dawn spills weak light across endless sugar fields, their stalks sharp as knives, their roots sunk into soil darkened by sweat and blood. Smoke from burnt cane lingers in the air, mixing with the sour tang of iron. At the gates of the Caldus plantation, an old man leans against the post. Old Joachim, the gatekeeper, his back bent like the rusted hinges he guards. His fingers tremble as he fumbles with the lock, but he says nothing. He's learned that silence survives longer than speech. Hooves strike the dirt. A cart approaches, carrying a veiled woman in plain habit. Sister Magdalena, her face pale beneath the linen, grips her rosary as though it were a weapon. The cries she heard on the road still echo in her chest. "Is this the Caldus estate?" she asks, voice soft, careful like stepping barefoot on glass. Joachim nods, lips pressed shut. His eyes flicker toward the horizon, where smoke coils above the fields. He mutters low, not to her but to the earth itself. "That tree eats men." Magdalena frowns, drawing her veil tighter. "What tree?" His chin tilts toward the courtyard. Beyond the whitewashed mansion and its arched balconies, a massive oak stretches its limbs. Its bark is scarred, gouged by knives, etched with initials that are not prayers but verdicts. Rusted iron rings bite into its trunk. The tree of punishments. Two overseers drag a man beneath it. His shirt is torn, his back striped with whip marks. Chains rattle as they bind his wrists. The man does not cry out. He only breathes slow, resigned. The first crack of leather cuts the morning stillness. Birds scatter. Sister Magdalena flinches, the sound ringing louder than church bells. "Why do you not stop it?" She whispers to Joachim. His eyes, clouded and wet, never leave the tree. "I've buried more than I can count," he says. "And I've learned, sometimes silence is the only prayer left." Children huddle nearby, thin shadows against the wall. They hum under their breath, a broken lullaby without melody, the words swallowed by fear. Magdalena strains to catch the fragments. The song does not soothe. It unsettles, like a memory of grief passed down from mother to child. The whip cracks again. The overseer laughs. The social order here is not written in laws, but in flesh. Portuguese masters and their heirs inside the mansion. Priests and nuns looking away. African slaves bent under cane and iron. The hierarchy stands like the sugar stalks themselves. Tall, sharp, impossible to break without blood. Magdalena grips her rosary until her knuckles whiten. This place, she breathes, it is not of God. Old Joachim closes the gate with a heavy groan. His whisper carries no hope, only weary truth. It belongs to the devil. And he sits in the master's chair. The chains rattle once more, as if the tree itself is hungry. The boy was small, barefoot, and quick as a sparrow in the cane fields. Toinho, his real name lost in the ledger of the ships. But his mother's voice gave him one that clung like a scar. A thin scar cut across his eyebrow, a white line where the lash had kissed him once. He touched it often, as though reminding himself he was still alive. Chains followed him everywhere, not always on his wrists, but always in his shadow. In the courtyard, voices rose like smoke. The women had gathered to strip cane leaves, their hands moving fast, faster than thought. And above their rhythm came the hum of a voice, low, trembling, beautiful. It was Rosa, Toinho's mother. Her voice was soft, carrying fragments of an old world the masters forbade. The lullaby curled through the air. "Sleep, little bird, chains cannot hold dreams." Toinho stopped to listen. For a moment the chains seemed to loosen, then a shout, a crack like thunder. The overseer's whip tore the song in half. Rosa's body jerked forward, cloth ripping, skin opening. She stumbled, but her voice did not die. It faltered, then rose again, broken but defiant. Toinho ran toward her, but a hand yanked him back. His older brother, tall and wiry, eyes burning like coals. "Stay!" he hissed. "Watch, remember." Across the courtyard, the master stepped into view. Baron Domingos Caldas. He carried a silver-handled cane, polished until it gleamed in the sun. He never touched soil, never bent to labor. His shoes were always clean, though blood often splattered near them. He was known as the man whose hands never touched earth, only blood. He raised the cane, not to strike, but to point. "Enough," he said, his voice calm, refined like a man ordering wine. "She will learn silence." Rosa's song ended with another lash. She crumpled to the ground, her body trembling. Toinho bit his lip until it bled. His brother's grip held him fast, but his heart swore an oath it could not yet speak. That night Rosa sang again. Broken voice, broken body. Yet still she sang to her children in the hut where damp earth smelled of sweat and straw. Her lullaby wove through the dark. "Sleep, little bird, chains cannot hold dreams." Toinho lay awake, whispering the words back. The scar above his eye burned. Days turned into seasons. He grew taller, but silence pressed harder around him. Rosa's songs grew softer, as though each one cost her a piece of her life. Then came the day when the courtyard filled again, but this time the song was absent. The tree of punishments loomed, its branches heavy with silence. At its roots stood Toinho's brother, wrists bound, head unbowed. The crowd gathered. The overseer adjusted the rope. Baron Caldas watched from his balcony, silver cane resting lightly in his hand. Toinho tried to push forward, but Rosa held him back, her nails digging into his shoulders. Her face was pale, eyes burning with unshed tears. The rope tightened. A drumbeat of chains clinked as if mocking. The boy gasped as his brother's body lifted, feet kicking, air filling with the creak of rope. No cry came from the condemned. Only silence. The crowd looked away, except for Toinho. He stared until his eyes blurred, until he saw only shadows dancing on the bark. The tree groaned as though feeding on life. Beside him, Rosa whispered, almost to herself, "One day it will take the wrong man." Toinho clutched her hand. His innocence cracked like dry cane beneath the knife. Years later, men would whisper that his scar was not just from the lash, but from that day, the day he carved his brother's death into his own skin with memory. And in the mansion, Baron Caldas drank by candlelight, his silver cane resting across his knees. Firelight danced in his eyes. He believed himself eternal, untouchable. He did not yet know that every lullaby, every scar, every drop of blood in the soil was sharpening a blade meant for his throat. For now, the boy only watched. The chains clinked. The fire burned. The song returned, soft and bitter, carried by a mother who refused to forget. And in that mix, chain, fire, song, an oath was born, one that would one day set the courtyard aflame. Night on the plantation was never quiet. Crickets scratched their songs, chains rattled faintly in the huts, and somewhere far off, a whip cracked even after dark. But in the small, firelit circle behind the cane fields, stories rose like sparks. Mateus sat at the center, skin as dark as midnight, his face carved by years of labor and scars that never healed. His eyes gleamed when he spoke, voice deep as drums. He told tales of kings from across the ocean, men who wore crowns of gold and walked among warriors. Toinho leaned forward, eyes wide. Were they real? He whispered. Mateus grinned, showing the gap where a tooth had been knocked out. "As real as this blood," he said, dragging a knife across his palm, just enough to draw a bead of red. He lifted it to the firelight. "Never forget, boy. They bleed just like us. Masters, soldiers, even your silver-caned baron. Their blood runs the same." The other men shifted nervously, afraid of talk that might reach ears it shouldn't. But Toinho drank every word like water. The scar over his brow tingled as though remembering. From Mateus, he learned more than stories. How to walk softly so chains did not clink. How to grind herbs to dull pain. how to look a man in the eye so he saw not just a slave, but something dangerous. But lessons did not only come from the huts. In the grand whitewashed chapel attached to the estate, Toinho sometimes swept floors while the masters prayed. The altar glittered with gold, and candles filled the air with smoke sweet as honey. One morning, as he bent to gather hymnals, a voice startled him. "You're holding it upside down." He froze. A girl stood by the pews, hair braided neatly, dress pale blue. Helena Caldas, the Baron's daughter. Her eyes were not cold like her father's. They flickered with something closer to curiosity. Toinho lowered his head quickly. "Forgive me, señorita," but she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You can't read it, can you?" He dared a glance upward. She wasn't mocking him, she was interested. "No," he admitted. She glanced around. The chapel was empty. With a swift motion, she pulled a small folded sheet from her pocket. A letter creased from being read too often. She slipped it between the pages of the hymnal he carried. "Hide this. Open it when no one watches." That night in the dim hut he unfolded it. Shapes covered the page, letters curling and strange. Beside them in careful ink she had written, "A is for Av, B is for Bondade, C is for Kadea Chains." His lips struggled over the words, but each mark carried weight. The next day, sweeping again, he found her waiting. "Did you look?" she asked. He nodded. "Then tomorrow," she said, "I'll teach you more." And so it began. Their secret stretched through weeks, then months. Letters slipped inside hymnals, folded in prayer books, hidden beneath loose stones in the chapel floor. Each one held not only lessons, but glimpses into her world. Poems she liked, questions she dared not ask aloud. One night, beneath the lamp in his hut, Toinho whispered the words of a psalm she had copied for him. His mother listened, her face lit with wonder and fear. "You're playing with fire," Rosa warned. "That girl's pity will not save you. It will destroy you." But Toinho kept reading. He felt something uncoiling in him, something sharper than grief. Knowledge was a blade, and Helena had placed it in his hand. Sometimes, when their eyes met in the chapel, a silence stretched too long, heavy with something unspoken, forbidden, fragile yet there. And Helena, her hands trembling as she slipped him the letters, knew she was crossing a line her father would never forgive. Each page she gave away pulled her further from her blood and closer to betrayal. Once, as he traced the ink, Toinho asked Matthias quietly, "Why does she help me?" Matthias spat into the dirt. "Because she thinks she can stand in both worlds. But blood," he lifted his scarred hand, "blood always wins." "You'll see," the boy didn't answer. But in his chest, chains rattled against letters. Songs tangled with blood, and somewhere far above them, Baron Caldas raised his silver cane to strike a servant. Firelight flashing across polished metal. The world was splitting, and everyone could feel the crack. The midday sun scorched the courtyard, turning the dust white and the air thick as smoke. A man was dragged forward, wrists bound with rope, sugar granules still clinging to his torn shirt. His crime was small, a handful of sweetness stolen from the master's store, but on the Caldas estate, hunger was no defense. Captain Lobo shoved him against the roots of the tree. The overseer's breath stank of cheap whiskey. His face red and blotched, his grin too wide. The bottle dangled from his belt, sloshing with each swaggering step. Caught him chewing like a rat, Lobo barked, slamming his boot into the prisoner's ribs. Thought he could sweeten his tongue without asking. The crowd of slaves gathered silent, eyes down. They had seen this play before, but silence trembled, brittle, waiting for the snap. From the mansion steps, Baron Domingos Caldas descended, silver cane in hand. He walked slow, deliberate, as though the world moved at his command. At his side came Helena, pale dress glowing in the sun. She clutched her shawl tightly, unease flickering in her eyes. "Bring my daughter forward," Caldas ordered. Helena stiffened. "Father must die." "Yes!" His voice cut sharp, final. "You will learn strength, or you will learn nothing." Lobo shoved her closer to the tree, his grin widening as though the cruelty was his wine. Toinho stood among the workers, eyes locked on Helena. He saw her trembling hands, the way her gaze darted from the bound man to her father's unyielding face. The Baron raised his silver cane, pointing it like a sword. "Watch," he commanded. "Mercy is a disease, and I am the cure." The words struck harder than any whip. Captain Lobo swung. The first lash cracked like thunder, tearing flesh. Blood bloomed against the man's back, running down his sides. He grunted but did not scream. Helena flinched, her lips parting in horror. "Please," her father's eyes narrowed. "Hold your tongue." Another crack. The prisoner's knees buckled. Chains rattled against the bark of the tree. The crowd of slaves shifted, whispers leaking like smoke. "To watch her watch us bleed," one murmured. "This will turn one day," another whispered back. Toinho's fists clenched. His scar throbbed, memory of his brother's hanging flashing before him. He caught Helena's gaze just for a heartbeat. She looked at him, eyes wet, torn between two worlds. Lobo laughed, the sound raw and cruel. He raised his whip again, but his balance faltered, too much whiskey. The crowd stilled, breath held, as though waiting for a sign. The Baron stepped forward, his voice cold as steel. "Finish it." The whip struck again. The prisoner finally cried out, the sound twisting through the courtyard like a curse. Helena turned away, pressing her hands to her ears. Caldas seized her wrist, forcing her head back. "Face it," he barked. "This is power, and power is what keeps us alive." The final lash fell. Blood dripped from the man's torn back, staining the tree's roots deeper. Lobo tossed the whip aside, wiping sweat with the back of his hand, and reached for his bottle. Silence fell heavy. The only sound was the clink of the prisoner's chains as he collapsed at the foot of the tree. The slaves did not cry out. They did not move, but their whispers coiled like smoke. One day it will turn. And Toinho, eyes locked on the Baron, felt something inside him harden into stone. The cure the master spoke of was poison, and poison had a way of seeping back into the hand that poured it. The cane fields whispered at night. Leaves rubbed together like blades sharpening, and the air carried the damp weight of storms that never came. Beneath that dark canopy, Toinho began to gather those who still had fire in their blood. Mateus sat cross-legged in the dirt, tracing lines with a stick. "A plan must have patience," he muttered. "Strike too early and we all swing. Strike too late and the boy grows into another Caldas." Across from him, a new figure hunched over a clay bowl. Sebastian the healer. His fingers were stained green and brown from roots he had crushed into powder. The smell was sharp, bitter, almost metallic. "This root kills slow," Sebastian explained, voice low, eyes darting toward the shadows. "It eats the stomach, turns the blood sour. Slip it in wine, and by morning he'll curse his own flesh." He lifted the bowl so the moonlight caught the fine powder. "Poison is patient too." Toinho watched, scar glinting in the firelight. His fists were tight, but his voice steady. "We will need both patience and poison, and blades for when patience ends." From the darkness, a woman stepped closer. Inez, her eyes bright as embers, a thin dagger hidden at her waist. She pressed it into the soil beside her with quiet resolve. "Blades are already waiting." Toinho's chest stirred at her presence. Inez had been beside him since childhood, her laughter once his shield against despair. Now her silence was sharper, her devotion dangerous. Mateus nodded toward her. "A woman who carries steel in her skirts is worth 10 men with guns." The circle grew quiet. Inez looked at Toinho, her voice almost a whisper. "You will not do this alone." He held her gaze, letting the vow settle, but rebellion grew teeth only in shadows. During the day, the world watched. The mansion's windows were always eyes, and within the chapel, the greatest danger wore holy robes. Father Lorenzo stood before the altar, plump fingers glittering with rings. He blessed with one hand and took bribes with the other. His letters, sealed in red wax, carried more weight than sermons. Whispers said he told the Baron everything for the price of silver. On Sunday, as incense clouded the air, Toinho slipped into the chapel to sweep. Beneath his rags, hidden in the folds of a hymnal, lay a pouch of Sebastian's powder. He froze when a heavy step echoed behind him. "Boy," Captain Lobo slurred, staggering down the aisle, whiskey sloshing in his hand. His eyes narrowed on the hymnal pressed to Toinho's chest. "Oh, what's that you clutch so tight?" Toinho lowered his head. "Only prayer books, senor." Lobo lunged, snatching at the hymnal. For one breath, Toinho felt the pouch press hard against his ribs, certain it would spill. But Father Lorenzo stepped from the sacristy, hands raised in irritation. "Leave the books, Captain. They are worth more than the boy," Lobo sneered, taking a swig from his bottle. "One day I'll catch him hiding something." His boots scraped as he left, laughter echoing in the holy silence. Toinho exhaled, sweat cold on his back. Lorenzo smirked. "Careful, boy. Secrets burn brighter than candles in this house." Another near catch came days later. Helena, trembling, slipped a folded page into Toinho's basket. A lesson, a warning, maybe both. But Baron Caldus's hand, sharp as a hawk's, seized it before Toinho could. "What's this?" The silver cane tapped the paper as he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words. "No chain is eternal." Helena's face drained of color. "It is only a prayer, Father." From the Psalms, his eyes pierced her. "A prayer does not speak of chains." He crushed the page in his fist, fire flickering in his gaze. "Be careful, girl. Mercy is weakness, and weakness rots the bloodline." He strode away, leaving Helena's hands shaking. Across the courtyard, Toinho's jaw tightened. The chain between them was stretched thin, close to breaking, that night under the weight of a swollen moon. Toinho gathered them again, Mateus with his scars, Sebastian with his powders, Inez with her hidden dagger. Helena, too, lingered at the edge of the circle, her eyes burning with silent defiance. Toinho placed a rusted chain on the ground, then set a blade beside it, and finally, Sebastian sprinkled a trace of poison across them both. "This tree," Toinho whispered, eyes fixed on the silhouette of the oak in the distance, "has eaten our brothers and mothers. But we will feed it different meat. We'll turn his tree of punishments into his gallows." Inez pressed her dagger deeper into the dirt. Matthias nodded slowly. Sebastian muttered a prayer to gods older than the chapel's cross. The oath settled heavy in the night air. The rebellion had begun, not with fire, but with whispers, powder, and the promise of blood. The Caldus estate burned with music before it burned with fire. Torches lit the courtyard, throwing gold across polished silver trays. Fiddles scraped, tambourines clattered, drunken voices rose into the heavy night air. The Baron's guests, Portuguese planters, officers, the priest in his silk, laughed until the laughter curdled into coughing. At the long table, Baron Domingos Caldas sat at the head. His silver cane leaned against his chair, gleaming like a sword. He lifted a goblet of wine, but instead of drinking, he swirled it, watching the dark liquid move like blood. Sebastian, hidden among the servants, froze. His fingers tightened around the ladle that had poured the poisoned vintage. The Baron's eyes narrowed. "Too bitter," he said, setting the cup down untouched. "Bring me rum." Toinho, carrying platters, felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The poison had been their first strike, and already suspicion clouded the air. From the shadows of the cane fields, Inez moved. She pressed flint to dry stalks soaked in oil. A spark, then a sudden hiss of fire. The flame leapt greedy, and the wind fed it, carrying orange tongues across the fields. The first shouts came from the edge of the plantation. "Fire! Fire in the cane!" Guards stumbled from their posts, torn between feast and flame. Inside the hall, drums beat harder, but now the rhythm was no longer music, it was warning. A child's voice rose among the chaos. Joanna, barely 9, clutched a rag doll to her chest as she sang softly, almost unheard, "Sleep, little bird." Chains cannot hold dreams. The lullaby drifted like smoke, a memory from Rosa's lips carried forward by a child's trembling voice. Toinho heard it and felt the scar over his eye burn hot, as if his mother's hand pressed him toward destiny. Captain Lobo, drunk and staggering, burst from the hall, whip in hand. "To arms!" he roared, whiskey dripping from his beard. "Cut them down before the fire takes us all." But the fire had already taken more than fields. It had taken fear. Machetes, hidden in baskets and beneath rags, flashed in the torchlight. Blades met leather whips. The courtyard split into chaos. Shouts, screams, the smell of blood mixing with cane smoke. Mateus swung a hoe like an axe, splitting the skull of a guard. Sebastio drove a sharpened stake into another's chest. Inez's dagger carved through a soldier's throat. Her face set, eyes blazing, and through it all, Toinho moved with purpose, his gaze fixed only on the Baron. Baron Caldas rose slowly, cane in hand, surveying the carnage. He did not flinch. Instead, he barked orders like a general. "Hold the gates, drown them in their own blood." But his men faltered. Cut down by fury, sharpened by generations of pain, Toinho stepped into the Baron's path. For a moment, silence fell, as though even the fire leaned closer. "You," the Baron sneered, the boy with chains in his eyes. "Did you think you could rise above the earth you till?" Toinho lifted a length of rusted chain, its links heavy in his fist. "This earth has already swallowed you." He lunged, knocking the silver cane aside. The Baron struck with surprising strength, fist connecting with Toinho's jaw. But Toinho did not fall. He swung the chain, wrapping it around the Baron's throat. The two struggled, crashing against overturned tables, goblets spilling blood-red wine into the dirt. At the edge of the estate, hoofbeats thundered. Corporal Vieira arrived with a handful of soldiers, summoned too late. The glow of fire painted their faces as they hesitated, hearing screams, seeing steel flash. Vieira spat. "By God, it's a slaughter." But the soldiers did not charge. They lingered at the gates, unsure whether to face fire or fury. Toinho dragged the Baron across the courtyard. Flames licked higher, silhouetting the gnarled oak, the tree of punishments. Its roots were dark with the memory of blood. The Baron thrashed, spitting curses. "You are nothing," he hissed, voice ragged against the chain. "A dog biting the hand that feeds it." Toinho forced him against the trunk, chaining him where so many had once hung. His voice was steady, final. "I am your cure." The Baron's eyes widened at his own words reflected back. For the first time, fear cracked his mask. Toinho hauled the chain upward. The Baron's body jerked, silver cane clattering to the ground. His feet kicked, then stilled, bare toes brushing the blood-soaked roots. The fire consumed the estate, roaring louder than the screams. The sugar fields burned like torches, smoke blotting out the stars. Guests fled, soldiers scattered. The priest vanished, and in the center of it all, beneath the burning sky, Baron Domingos Caldas swung from the tree of punishments, his body just another offering to the soil he had ruled with fire. Joanna's lullaby still floated, trembling but unbroken, as the chains rattled in the flames. The master was no longer master. The estate was no longer estate. Only fire, blood, and vengeance remained. The fire smoldered for days. Charred beams jutted like broken teeth where the Caldas mansion had stood. The cane fields were nothing but ash, sweet smoke still clinging to the air, but silence never lasts. The screams of the dying gave way to wails of the mourning. Mariana, a mother with eyes hollowed by grief, stumbled among the ruins. Her hands clawed through ash until she found the small shoe of her son. He had been caught in the blaze, swallowed before dawn. She pressed the soot-stained leather to her lips, rocking as if the child still breathed. Around her, other women keened. Children gone, husbands gone. Fire did not choose sides, it ate all. Caldas deserved his end, Mariana whispered, voice breaking. But my boy was not his crime. The words traveled, whispers wrapped in smoke. Toinho was taken in chains before noon, dragged half dead from the cane ditch where he had collapsed. His wrists bled, his body burned, yet his face carried no plea. Captain Lobo, battered and bruised, shoved him forward with a whip coiled at his hip. "Here's your lion," he spat. Not so fierce without his pack. Sebastio was caught soon after, poison-stained hands bound behind him. Mateus, too old to run, was dragged by the hair. Inez fought like a blade herself, cutting 2 men before they pinned her, kicking and spitting, to the ground. The rebellion had burned bright, but the colonial crown had soldiers enough to smother it. Within weeks, Recife's courthouse brimmed with talk of the Caldas massacre. At its center stood Judge Faria, a man of powdered wigs and fat fingers. His lips curled around every word like a snake savoring prey. He sat beneath the royal crest, tapping a quill against the desk as the accused were lined up before him. "Toinho," the judge declared, voice sharp, "you are charged with murder, sedition, and blasphemy against crown and cross. How do you plead?" The courtroom held its breath. Toinho stood shackled, eyes forward, scar over his brow catching the light. He said nothing. Faria leaned forward. "Speak, boy." Silence, the judge sneered. "Then silence will hang with you." Witnesses came one after another. Overseers swore they saw Toinho light the fire. Priests swore he defiled the altar. A soldier claimed he heard him cry out against the king, each testimony more twisted than the last. Helena Caldas appeared, her eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. She trembled as she took the stand. He was only a boy," she said softly. "My father made him what he was." Faria slammed his quill down. "Irrelevant. The crown does not care for weak excuses." Toinho looked at her once, but said nothing. In the prison that night, rats scurried across the straw. Chains rattled with every breath. Sebastian groaned, his body broken. Inés pressed her back to the wall, humming faintly, trying to keep the dark at bay. And from another cell, Joanna's fragile voice rose. "The lullaby again, sleep little bird. Chains cannot hold dreams." The melody seeped through the stones, wrapping around them like a prayer. For a moment, even Toinho's scarred face softened. He closed his eyes and let Rosa's song return. Dawn came with drums. Soldiers marched Toinho to the square, where gallows had been raised. The crowd pressed in, whispers like wind through reeds. "There he is, the one who hung the Baron. They say the fire spared his body, because the devil himself held his soul. No, the saints walk with him. Did you not hear? The rope will not hold." Judge Faria arrived, robes trailing, lips wet with satisfaction. "This ends today," he declared. "Order will be restored." Toinho mounted the steps without a word. His chains clinked with every rise. The executioner placed the noose around his neck. Faria stood. "Any last words, slave?" For the first time, Toinho's voice carried over the crowd. Steady, unbroken, "You cannot hang a dream." Gasps rippled through the square. The drum rolled. The lever dropped. The rope snapped taut, then jerked loose. The crowd screamed. Some swore they saw angels, others demons. The executioner fumbled, sweat dripping. A new rope was fetched, knotted tighter, looped again. Faria roared, "Do it again!" The second rope held. Toinho's body swung, chains rattling one last time, but the story had already slipped beyond the judge's reach. That night, Mariana whispered to the women mourning beside the ashes. The boy's rope broke once. God marked him. In taverns, men swore they heard singing in the prison before dawn. In the barracks, soldiers whispered that the tree of punishments now bore two masters, the old and the new. And when storms lashed the coast, lightning striking the burned oak, people crossed themselves and muttered, "The Baron swings still on storm nights." And beside him the boy who could not be hanged. The years washed over Pernambuco like tides, carrying bodies away but leaving stories rooted deep. The Caldas estate never rose again. Where its white walls once gleamed, weeds sprouted among the blackened stones. Only the oak remained, the tree of punishments, its bark charred, its branches twisted against the sky. They said the tree had grown black leaves after the fire, darker than night, as if fed by blood instead of rain. No one dared cut it down. Those who tried swore their axes bent or their hands stiffened before the first strike. In the taverns of Recife, sailors traded ghost stories with their rum. They spoke of the cursed Baron, swinging still when storms rolled in from the sea. His chains clinked in the cane fields, they said, dragging across the soil he once owned. Some claimed to see his pale face pressed against the windows of ruined houses, whispering bargains to any man desperate enough to listen. Others told of another ghost, quieter, fiercer, a barefoot boy with a scar over his eye, walking among the rows of cane, whispering to those still in chains, "Wait, one day the tree will take another." Children carried a different memory. In villages where fire had not yet reached, they sang Rosa's lullaby, not as a cradle song, but as defiance. Sleep, little bird. Chains cannot hold dreams. Mothers hushed them, afraid the overseers would hear. But the children sang louder, turning lullaby into anthem. Even when whips cracked, the song lingered, stubborn as smoke. In a convent in Lisbon years later, a set of letters surfaced. They bore the trembling script of Helena Caldus. Smuggled across the Atlantic, sealed in false covers, they told of nights of fire and chains. My father was not master, she wrote. He was tyrant. And the boy he tried to break has become legend. Few believed her. Some dismissed the letters as a daughter's guilt. But whispers found ears among abolitionists. In Paris salons and London taverns, men quoted fragments. "Mercy is a disease," the Baron had said. "I am your cure," the boy had answered. The exchange traveled further than the empire, words sharper than any blade. On plantations across Brazil, men and women gathered by moonlight. They passed along the tale like contraband. The boy who hung his master from the tree meant for slaves. They recited it in hushed voices as both warning and promise. His rope broke once, they reminded each other. The crown cannot kill a dream. Chains rattled differently after that. Overseers still struck, barons still feasted. But the silence of the enslaved was no longer submission. It was waiting. Even Judge Faria could not silence it. He lived to grow fat and old. But whenever he entered a courtroom, he swore he heard faint humming, Rosa's lullaby, from some hidden corner. He would stop his quill, glance around, lips trembling, though no one else dared admit they heard. And when Captain Lobo drank himself into ruin, villagers said he screamed in his sleep, clutching his throat as if a chain still pulled at it. Legends bend with time. Some said Toinho became a saint, the boy martyr who faced the rope twice. Others swore he became a demon, haunting masters in their beds. But in every version, he remained a scar across the name of Caldus. The tree still stands. On storm nights, its branches creak like gallows, its roots thick with secrets. Travelers who pass claim the air tastes of smoke, and children dare each other to press an ear to the bark. They say if you do, you will hear chains rattle and a voice calm and steady. You cannot hang a dream. History remembers kings and barons. Their portraits hang in palaces, their names etched in ledgers and carved on marble. But legends are carved by the enslaved, the silenced, the hanged. What was the Caldus estate but another monument to cruelty, another sugar palace built on broken backs? Fire reduced it to smoke, but the story outlived the flames. For stone crumbles and gold tarnishes, yet memory walks in song and whispers. Justice in such times was never blind. It wore robes, carried canes, and spoke with the voice of judges who sold truth for silver. Vengeance, then, became the only language left to the chained. The oak tree still stands. Some call it cursed, others holy, but its roots run deep with blood, and its branches stretch high with memory. To hang a master upon his own gallows is not only rebellion, it is reversal. The world turned upright for a single blinding moment. Chains and fire. Two symbols older than empires. Chains to bind, fire to erase. And yet through history, they have become more than tools of oppression. Chains clink as warnings. Fire burns as cleansing. Again and again, they rise in the stories of the downtrodden. Was Toinho a murderer, or was he justice given flesh? Was he vengeance, or was he freedom breaking its silence? The judge had his answer. The crown had its rope. But the people, they kept another truth, humming it in lullabies, whispering it in storm winds. Perhaps the real curse is not the baron swinging in the fields, but the memory that refuses to be buried. For chains rust, fires die, but rebellion sings. If you were Toinho, scarred, chained, beaten, forced to watch your mother bleed beneath the whip, what would you have done? Would you have lowered your eyes, prayed for mercy, and let the world march on unchanged? Or would you have set fire to the fields, dragged the master to the tree, and burned it all down? History does not answer for us. It only leaves echoes. Echoes of chains rattling in the night, echoes of lullabies turned into war cries. The question is not what Toinho chose, but what you would choose. Standing at the edge of the gallows, staring at the man who held your life in his hands. Forgiveness or fire, silence or rebellion. Which would you claim? Because this is not just legend, this is history. And history hides darker truths than fiction ever dares to whisper. If this story unsettled you, share it. If it made you question justice, like it. If you want more voices dragged out of the shadows, subscribe. We tell these stories not to glorify the fire, but to remind you the world we inherit is built on chains and flames, and the question always remains, what will you do with them?